Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the organizers for giving this opportunity for us in the OECD's Fisheries Policies Division to participate in this delivery of the report and of all the recommendations. I'm going to do 3 slides. It's going to be very simple. First, I'm going to talk about some facts in the fisheries sector in the region. Then I'm going to talk about the assessment and the recommendations. And then I'm going to give some practical, what I consider to be practical way forwards, and link that up to what we have in the report talked about, the knowledge hub. So if I may just start here by saying that the fisheries sector of the Nordic region, of this region, of the NORA region, has few but valuable species. Now, this is both a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because you have something to concentrate on, namely few, and it's also a good thing because they're valuable, but it's not a whole range of things going out there. We're concentrating very much on a few whitefish species and shrimps and a few other things. But the really interesting thing is that these fish species and crustaceans that we fish up here, they have a humongous market out. They have a very, very big market appeal, and therefore you are in a very good market position with respect to the global fisheries markets. We have already heard that fishing fleets have been reduced. This part of the management changeover that has happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the management philosophy of the fisheries sector, has meant that fishing fleets has been reduced and has been more concentration. It's probably not a bad thing whatsoever. It's probably a very good thing, and we'll come back to the reasons for that. It's a proof that the fisheries sector actually can be managed in a way that is economically profitable. Employment is falling. We heard about that, and there are a number of reasons for why employment is falling. And I don't think we should see this as being necessarily a bad thing. Employment is falling because it's extremely difficult to recruit people to the fisheries sector. It's dirty jobs. It's the most dangerous job. People are away from home. So why do they want to do it when you at the same time offer them higher education? I mean, you would be stupid if you want to be a fisherman today, really, when you have the opportunity to go to university. And you're offering, at the one hand, people higher education, and then expect at the same time that you want to keep levels of employment in the fishing sector intact. You can't do that. That's not coherent. So let's get that straightened out. There is also an additional issue here, and that is that in the fisheries sector in many parts of this world, we see an aging workforce. And that aging workforce is gradually, for example, let me give you an example of Japan. Over the next 15 years, you're going to have a 25% cut in the number of people working there simply because of aging structures. People are leaving. And I'm sure that the Nordic region, had we had access to age distributions in this particular sector, will show similar things. You have high level of catches, historically high level of catches just now. There is somewhat a changing in fishing in the composition of species, and that comes back to the issue of climate change. We'll come back to that and the issue there and why that is important for Nordic cooperation. Aquaculture so far has only taken off in coastal Norway and in some in the Faroe Islands. There are some issues here also related to climate change, whether changes in sea temperature may make it profitable to do similar things in Iceland and in Greenland, but so far it has not taken off to any great extent. You are faced in the fisheries sector, which is a very important aspect, with a very global and a highly competitive market. And this compares very differently with agriculture, where agriculture is very protected. Fisheries is not protected. It is very, very international, and it's a very globalized market, and there is a very, very high level of competition, which means that it's important that you get it straightened out in your fisheries sector with respect to your management system. And we'll come back a little bit later to that. Or I should say, this is exactly the last bullet point here. This shows you the central role of your management system, that if you are up against a very highly competitive market, you better get your fisheries management system correct, so that the fisheries management system can provide for the highest level of profitability within that sector. It's your only lever you have. And that's an important thing. If we move on to the assessments and recommendations, we have very much identified some central things here. The first one, and this is perhaps a no-flyer, but the first one is really that sustainable development of fisheries is essential. If you are not looking at this sector in a sustainable development perspective, you will very much lose out on an opportunity. And therefore, giving the sector its right focus, ensuring that it's sustainable managed and responsible managed, ensuring that it's correctly surveyed and looked after and controlled is absolutely central if you want to keep a fisheries sector that is profitable for a long-term future. Research and innovation, in the last slide and the third slide I'll come back to a little bit more in more depth here, but research and innovation is also something that is important for the fisheries sector. After all, if you want to be living in a very competitive market, you need to be interested in how can we do this better? How can we make this more, not only more profitable, but how can we get better products out of it? And this is where research and innovation comes in as a crucial part of improving on the sector's profitability in the future. I'll come back to something called green growth, but just think about the fact here that fisheries, ocean-going fishing, is very energy intensive. And green growth tells us that we're not going to use so much energy anymore. And the fact that we put these two dots together means that innovation and research in fishing technologies that use less energy is really crucial for the future in this particular market. Regional cooperation already exists. And I want to underline that because this is one of the areas in fisheries where we are interested in showing that regional cooperation through ICES, through NEAFC, among other places, actually does take place. It takes place because you are forced into thinking that fisheries is an international thing because fish stocks move around. You are sharing stocks. You are interested in the biology of these stocks, where they are not. And there are seasonalities in it, which makes it that you have to cooperate, and you're already doing it. I just want to underscore that. There may be need for even more cooperation, but it already happens within NEAFC and within ICES. And I must say that among all international regional fisheries management organizations and management organizations, ICES here in Copenhagen and NEAFC in London, it's fairly successful. And I think that's something that we would like to underscore as well. Lastly but not leastly, product value added is not a bad thing. There's a tendency up in the Nordic region to sell fish in its primary state. That means as either fresh, frozen, fillets, head-on, but gutted, and the like. That's not particularly smart. Now, that's probably a private initiative that needs to come in there and say, well, let's make something with sauces on, let's make fish fingers, let's make this and make that. That makes it more value added, and that may have a more appeal and be easier to transport into the main Central European, American, and Japanese markets and Asian markets. So that may be something that you also need to be keeping in mind. Lastly but not leastly, we have been looking at NORA as a knowledge hub. And I think that there are a number of things happening in the fisheries sector that all points to the fact that if you were to pool resources together in terms of research, innovation, and mindsets, you actually can do much better if you do that. Now, clearly, there's the fish and the fish farming. We've already talked about that. There's the gear technology, there's fleet technology, and so on and so forth, and there's fisheries management. When you take the second bullet point here, where we talk about climate change and ocean acidification, I only need to mention one fish species called mackerel at this point in time, and some of you will laugh, and some of you will be very happy, and there will be other parts of this world that will be very unhappy, because it happens to be that mackerel has moved up in the North Sea, up in the NORA region, and it happens to be that there are all sorts of discussions at this point in time as to whose mackerel is it. Now, mackerel doesn't have or carry passports, it doesn't have flag on the tails or anything like that. But it moves around, and it just happens to be that there are some countries around this table here that now believes that because it's in their waters, it's their mackerel. And that could very well be that that's the case. And it's going to happen on a continuous basis. This is just one example. So therefore, it's extremely important that against this background of climate change, acidification, and what's going on in the marine environment, that you do come together to cooperate about how do you cope with it. Because at a given point in time, you may even have that they are going east-west. Now, when they start going east-west, are you going to start fighting with each other? That's a question you ought to be thinking about now before it happens. And that's why all this about cooperation is crucially important. Fisheries management, the third bullet point up here. We know that fisheries management has moved away from being a single species fisheries management to multiple species fisheries management. And then we put economics into it in the 60s, in the 80s. Now we are doing ecosystem fisheries management, and there's an evolution on it because the last bullet point here talks about green growth imperatives. It's clear for us in the OECD, and this has nothing to do with this report here, but this is the work that I'm doing for the OECD's Fisheries Committee, that the green growth imperative, when you move from fisheries management to ecosystem management, then taking into account green growth means that we probably need to be moving into marine integrated management approaches to how to deal with it. This is about conflicts. This is about territorial use rights. This is about who's got right to be there in these big water masses. Should it be oil extraction? Should it be fishing? Should it be tourism? Should it be transport? Should it be shipping? Should it be extract of gravel? They're all happening there. And we need to find solutions to it. We don't have them today. But I think that in the Nordic region, in the NORA region, there's a very important tradition for collaborating. And there's a very important tradition for talking with research institutions across this region here, that there are ways forward where you can start thinking about how do we actually get ahead and think maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road, but do it now, because once you're there, it's too late. So that's all what I had to say. The future is in your hands. I pointed to a couple of things here that is just around the corner, but where you have huge opportunities to cash in on it now with a substantive NORA region collaborative effort. Thank you.